Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Chicago-based jazz pianist, composer, and educator Steve Million. This veteran musician has deep roots in Kansas City, and he opened up about that. He also has etched quite a path in the world of jazz. He's a cancer survivor and has some great insights as we continue to go through our COVID-19 world. He also has two new CDs, one called What I Meant to Say, and the other is Steve Million, featuring Sarah Marie Young. He's full of wisdom and insights. Enjoy the stories.
Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Joe Davino, Neon Jazz.
Hey, how you doing?
What's shaking?
Oh, I'm just sitting in my backyard.
Cool, man. Well, you probably need to relax after you got a lot of material out. You got a couple albums going on right now. It seems like you're pretty busy.
That is true, man. I have been just burning the candle at both ends.
Right on. Well, let's talk about all that jazz, and let's start off with What I Meant to Say and your album with Sarah Marie Young. You got new material out. You know, it's coming out during what I was saying about a month ago, which was the tail end of the pandemic. And again, we're in that ambiguous gray area, so I don't know what we're in anymore. But I mean, I guess we'll just call it living on planet Earth from now on. What does it mean to release this with at least some possibility of performing live and some things kind of getting some breath into it since March of 2020?
You know, I used the time I had during the... Well, first of all, the record was Steve Cardenas and Ron Vincent and John Sims, the What I Meant to Say record, right before the pandemic, November of 2019. And, you know, we had no idea. We thought we'd get this thing out right away. And even I had booked a flight to go back to do some extra things there was a couple of things I wanted to work on, and we wanted to do the mixing there all together, right? Well, that never happened, of course. So it kind of sat around, you know, and for that until the summertime. You know, I was working long distance to get the final mix together. That was a new experience. I had never done a long distance mix where, you know, he sends you stuff, you make recommendations, and then the other guys were all chiming in. So it took a long time to get it finally mixed. But then it sounded really good. We were very happy with the sound of the record. That record, I wanted it to be sort of a historical document, and Origin Records really approached just exactly the way I asked, you know, with photos from stuff that was happening way back when we first got that band together. So this was really and truly a record that was 40 years in the making, as they like to say. We had that band, and the band broke up, but we always remembered that band, and no matter where we lived, we were always talking about doing this project, right? But it didn't happen until 2019. It was such a kind of a blessed event, so to speak, just something that we just really, you know, we were all concerned we couldn't go into the studio and play, you know, like this stuff the way we had done it. It was funny because it just kind of fell into place. There wasn't any angst or any problems at all with the performance. So that being said, then also during the pandemic, I was sitting around. My wife was in Tokyo for 4 months, so I had the kids, and I had many projects going on. I was designing a class, you know, for a college and doing all this work. But then the guy who engineered the record called me up, the Jazz Words record, the one with Sarah Marie Young. He called me up and he said, you know, you got to listen to this again. This thing is really good. And I had sort of dismissed it, thinking that it wasn't a good enough recording. We made that record, that the other record, the Jazz Words record, literally in an afternoon, in 4 hours. We recorded the whole 8 tunes.
Wow.
Jammed them right through. We had been playing a lot at that time. This was in 2015 when we recorded that. And I had just kind of let it sit. I was going to use it as a demo to get gigs. I know this seems like kind of like I'm putting it down, but in a way, it happened in a very fresh and meaningful way that when I listened to it and kind of unearthed it, I was like, oh my God, this is so much better than I remember. I didn't really do much listening to it, at the time. And the band had kind of slowly straggled apart. Juan moved back to Peru and John moved to New York, the bass player. And we all had different projects, some of them with each other, but we just had other projects going on. So that record was actually Bradley Williams, the engineer, just kept bringing it up to me. And I finally did listen to it. And then I said, and I played it for Sarah. And Sarah goes, that's a record. We got to do something with that, So we spent all summer on that one, too, me and Bradley, trying to get it to sound good, because there were some problems. There's issues with the bass sound. And because we didn't really work on it from the level of making a record, there were things that we kind of didn't really think about, right? We got it to sounding really good. I mean, I was really amazed at Bradley's work. He put a lot of time in on it, and got the bass in particular was sounding bad. So we got that sounding good, and I decided, well, I'm gonna do this. And the timing was such that, I called up Kate, who's an old friend of mine. I said, I've got 2 records here. Origin has picked up one of them, and the other one I'm going to self-release. And she goes, well, let's just do it, And most people would say that's a bad idea, and maybe it is. I'm not really sure. I mean, what do you think? I mean, is it a bad idea to release 2 CDs at the same time under one name? I don't know. I'm not sure.
I don't think it's a problem, and I think especially now with what we've all gone through, I don't think we can question artistic output. I mean, I think there may have been a time where it's like, 2019 world dictates this, but I think all of the rules and all of the abandon that we've gone by, I think it's all out the window. We're like cancer survivors. It's like, you know what? You either live or you don't live, and you
Right.
just decide to live and put it out.
Well, I am a cancer survivor, so, there's that. Yeah, that was funny that you had mentioned that very term, because one of the things that made the other record, the Origin record, one of the reasons we wanted to put that together is because 10 years ago I had cancer, and it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. I survived, and I'm fine, and everything's good. But I remember Cardenas and Ron calling me and said, we've got to do this thing we've been talking about for years. Like, we're not getting any younger, that kind of thing. So that was the thing that kind of triggered us. But then it took 10 more years. It lit a fire under our very slow-moving asses, but we finally did it. And, it's hard to do a record when you have, I'm in Chicago and they're in New York, and it just was complicated, but we finally got it done. But I agree with you. That was kind of my thing. I had some other radio and press people say don't do it, but Kate said let's do it. You should do it. And she wanted to approach it. So I just thought I'm going to do this because one thing, I haven't been releasing a lot of stuff under my own name. I have other projects with other people that have other names, but I hadn't really done anything under my own name for quite some time. And I had all these things sitting around, so I just decided to get it out there, But I appreciate your input. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So let's go back to the beginning. Being into jazz is like almost like having an addiction, good or bad. How did this all begin as you were growing up to really get absorbed into the world of jazz?
That's a good question. Well, I grew up in a really small town, and there were no jazz programs. I just turned 67 years old, so I was a child of the 60s, and I grew up listening to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, music of that era, which I thought was really good. I still do. I still love the music I grew up with, which was a lot of rock music and folk music and, Joni Mitchell and Led Zeppelin and all that kind of stuff. But I was particularly focused as a musician. My parents had a piano in the house. Nobody was a musician in my family. But I started trying to imitate blues. like I loved Muddy Waters when I was a guy. I bought a Muddy Waters record when I was in high school, and I thought, I loved Otis Spann. He was my hero he still is, but I really liked Chicago blues, Chicago style, rock and blues, Howlin' Wolf, Little Milton, all that kind of stuff. And so I was really into Paul Butterfield. I love Paul Butterfield so much. But I really imitated, if there were any piano players on the records, I tried to imitate what they were doing. And I think I got a pretty good, but that was really where I started. I just was completely an ear player throughout high school. And then I bought, I got a notebook and I taught myself how to write music. And I started writing little songs. And my songs that I wrote had nothing to do with the blues. They were suddenly much more lyrical and different, sort of like leading to where I'm at today, I guess, in a way. But I didn't really have any jazz to bounce any of that off, although in blues, as you well know, there's a lot of improvisation. So I was improvising on the blues tunes that I knew. But that was kind of it. My parents got me a teacher when I was like a junior, I think, in high school in Columbia, Missouri. And I would drive over there, and she taught me about what a chord change was, like how to play chords. And that was fascinating to me, I remember being just like, oh, this is cool. I can write just a symbol down and write a melody, and that's great, cool, So that's where I kind of started. It was very, it was pretty bare bones. Then I decided when I was a senior, I heard this is a funny story, but I went to a Jethro Tull concert, I think when I was a senior. The band that warmed it up for the Jethro Tull concert was the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I had really not heard jazz before, So one of my first exposures to jazz was the warm-up band for Jethro Tull.
Wow.
and my friend hitchhiked over from Boonville to this concert in Columbia, and he arrived and he comes up to us and he says, "Hey man, I think this warm-up band's going to be really great." And I go, "Well, why? How do you know?" And he goes, "Well, they gave me they picked me up. They brought me over here." He goes, "There's an English guy. There's an English guy who plays guitar, and he told me I needed to listen to lots of Indian music." And the drummer just practiced the whole way. It was Billy Cobham, practicing, on a practice pad. And
wow.
I think it was Rick Laird too, and I think Jerry Goodman was in the band then, but he wasn't in the car with him. And they were just driving themselves across the country and doing this thing. It was very bare bones, just like it was. I heard this, and it did kind of alter my reality a bit. I had heard, when I was a little kid, my mom took me to hear Count Basie, and that was a very special moment in my life. I think that started me on sort of the jazz trajectory. But that was the Kansas City, jump blues, basically, is what I was listening to. And Count was very nice to me because I was the only kid at this concert. It was actually a dance for a military school. And he was super nice and let me sit at the piano with him. So those are the only two exposures to jazz. So you can imagine Count Basie and then Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Oh, my God.
Only in the 60s, right?
Yeah, right. Well, yeah.
So I got that, and then that really turned my head around. Then I went and bought a Mahavishnu Orchestra records, and I found Chick Corea records, and then I latched onto Monk, and that really altered my brain because I was playing, Monk's solo piano stuff, and the stuff I was listening to with the blues. I could really relate to how Monk had this kind of primitive streak, but was also imbued with such intelligence and such, just incredible, zeal, just power and intelligent thought, but also just kind of traditional at the same time, like stride piano with really amazing lines. I loved all that. Then I told my parents when I was a senior, I said, look, I want to study jazz. Then I somehow through that bare exposure, I said I want to study jazz, which really meant I wanted to study music. I don't know if at that time I knew what even jazz really was. I'm sure I didn't. So I went to North Texas State. My parents sent me there. And they could really barely afford it, even though it was only $700 a semester at that time for out-of-state tuition. But I went there. Yeah, I went there for a year, and I realized I was kind of a fish out of water because I didn't have the training. You know, it was one of the 3 major schools in the country at that time that offered jazz degree, jazz program. It was a really good place to be for someone who just was kind of awakening into music. But I didn't really play in any of the bands because I wasn't good enough. I mean, when I went there, I was still very unformed and very raw, and I didn't know a lot of things. And a lot of the musicians that were there were definitely from big high school programs where they had played a lot in large and small ensembles, so they knew a lot about that. So I listened a lot there, and I got inspired a lot. But I ended up coming back and then moving to Kansas City. And in Kansas City, I took my education a little more seriously, I guess. I decided to go to the Kansas City, what was called the Kansas City Conservatory, but it was the University of Missouri in Kansas City, and studied classical there and composition, and kind of started wrapping my head around the various weaknesses I had in my playing and, just practicing a lot. I became a better musician. I ended up dropping out. I didn't ever get a degree, but I did learn a lot at that school. And all I did was take music courses. I was just such a terrible student. I didn't take English or history or math or anything. All I took was, I don't know if my parents paid any attention, but that's all I did. And then I kind of dropped out to start playing some gigs. I got blues gigs right off the bat. And slowly but surely in Kansas City, I was able to kind of work my way up, and I was writing all these songs all the time. And eventually, over many years of kind of paying dues in Kansas City, I finally started getting my own bands together, and that's what led to Steve Cardenas one day calling me up and said, "Hey, man, we need to put a band together." He had heard me play somewhere, heard my tunes, and he really liked it. He wrote a lot of tunes, too, so we put together the first group, and it was called Four Friends. And then that started a long musical relationship with me and Steve. We had that band for about 3 or 4 years. Then Ron, the drummer, and I moved to New York, where I spent a couple of years. That was about 81. Spent a couple of years in New York. I had a kid in 1980, and the plan was for me to move her and Mom up there to be with us. I got it all set up, but then her mom decided she didn't really want to move to New York, so that was a big for me. So I ended up moving back to Kansas City. Who knows what would have happened if I had stayed in New York? I don't know. It would have been great. I was I was a little bit overwhelmed by New York, kind of like I was overwhelmed by North Texas. I was always feeling like I was kind of behind the 8 ball when I was younger, just playing catch up. Because unlike the guy who became my teacher in the 90s, Fred Hirsch. Fred always told me, like, I'm a lot younger than you, but I started playing professionally when I was like 5 years old. I was like still trying to figure out how to be a professional when I was in my mid-20s, right? So and plus just how to be good enough, right, to play, to keep up with everybody, So I was working really hard, practicing a lot. Eventually, then I got into Ida Macbeth's band. Steve Cardenas got the call to play in her band, and she was the most popular singer. Still is very popular in Kansas City. She's great, and I couldn't believe it. But then Steve recommended me for the piano chair and basically musical director. So I ended up getting that gig, and then Steve and I worked in that band for 5 years, and we worked 5-6 nights a week for 5 years. Never a night off, hardly. always playing. So that's what I did after, by this time, the Four Friends group, the group Steve and I had long fallen apart because Ron lived in New York then. But Steve and I played in this band, and I learned so much in that band, just how to be a professional. Ida was an incredibly inspirational boss. She was an amazing singer and an amazing musical professional. Just could absolutely destroy an audience with her emotion, her ability to sell a song. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So then in '88, I got into the Monk competition, and I decided I was moved to Chicago. I did the Monk competition, and then right after that, I moved to Chicago. I decided I had played in Chicago a couple of times with Ida, and I really dug it. In fact, we played at the old Playboy Club here. It was pretty fascinating. Long gone, but I remember really enjoying the audience. It was such a change from the Kansas City. We had our good people and followers and people like that, but the Kansas City crowd can be a little bit little country. It was just a more urbane crowd when we played in Chicago, and I remember really digging it. So I moved there. I got married, and we moved there to Chicago, and I've really never looked back. Chicago kind of been, it was a good marriage for me. I was able to, at least the Chicago thing was, but Chicago and I hit it off. I guess that's a good way to put it. But I was always working here in Chicago and just met so many great people here. In fact, one that was on the Monk competition is where I met him there, Mike Coker, who's a tremendous musician. He now runs the University of Arizona's jazz department. Mike and I put together a band with a drummer, Robert Shy, called Monk's Dream. And Mike played organ, I played piano, and Robert played drums. It was a trio, but an unusual trio, 2 keyboards and drums. And that band got real popular. We were together for about 5 years, and we played the Jazz Fest, and we played all around town. We played the Green Mill all the time. And it was just a really great band that kind of, we just played Monk tunes, and we just went and jammed them. We didn't have we had a few little arrangements, but mostly it was just showing up and playing, and we would play, a tune for 15 minutes, it was like we would really jam, so that was a fun experience. And at the same time, it's interesting because Steve Cardenas had a 2-guitar Monk band in San Francisco. It was funny, I called him, I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I got a 2-guitar Monk band." And I said, "Well, I got a 2-keyboard Monk band." We had kind of arrived at that at the same time. And as you probably know, Steve became the transcriber of the Thelonious Monk fake book. He was the guy, that Thelonious Monk fake book, which is really good, by the way. He's the guy that put that all together. He transcribed all these Monk tunes. It's a real good resource for anybody who wants to learn about Monk. But that kind of grew out of both of our enthusiasms for Monk. When he was putting that together, he would call me and say, "Hey, is this right? Do you think this looks good?" But we were, we've always been tight. Chicago's been good, but this last, like you said, this last year and a half has been, man. I have 2 little kids now. I kind of got married. I got married to Azusa, my wife, about 15 years ago or more. And we've had a couple of kids, but this last year has been, well, I'm not going to complain about it because it's been rough on everybody. But she was in Japan for like 4 months, because her father was dying, and it was just a really tough time. And that's when I decided to do these records. It's really weird because that kind of made me feel good, right? It was like, and really, I think like a lot of people, probably you too, that time away from doing my normal stuff, right, and being in the house all the time, it really altered my perceptions and sensibilities about things. I think that I'm not alone in this. But I decided that, with what time I have left on this planet, I'm going to really focus on this thing that I started doing way back in the day back in Boonville when I was just figuring out what I really wanted to do, which was write music and play music, write my, I like playing professionally. Of course, I love it. I play with it a lot, but the focus is now I'm going to try and keep it on doing my projects and getting them out there, I think that's important.
Man, you've done such a great job of kind of rounding through things. I have a couple questions I want to ask you.
Sure,
First of all,
of course.
what did you like the best about Kansas City?
I love the musicians that I still know to this day that live, many of them still live there, and some of them have moved elsewhere. But one of the drummers that I met there moved to Chicago a few years after I did, Tim Davis. And he and I now are in a band called Baker's Million, that me and this guy, Andy Baker. It's an all-original horn band, 3 horn. It's a sextet. That relationship I have with Tim has gone back so many years. The first time we ever played together was in my backyard in Kansas City in like 78 or something, So, I'm still playing with that guy. And, Cardenas, of course, but there's also many other musicians in Kansas City like that. I started playing with this real creative drummer, Arnie Young, and he was amazing. But I guess what I liked best about Kansas City was the close-knit camaraderie of the musicians. It was a great place to learn how to play, and that's what I was doing, when I was there. And for me, it was this great, it's just a great place to cook up your ideas, get a band together, try things out. And there was always an audience for it, there was a lot of little clubs and places to play. And so I learned how not only to be a working musician in Kansas City, but I learned how to be a creative musician there, and do my own thing, and also make a living, I guess. So the Kansas City, that's the best thing for me, was Kansas City's. And it's still doing that. I know some young musicians there. I don't know them, personally or anything, but I hear about them. And I know that Kansas City's doing that same kind of thing for them. Because it's kind of a small scene, but it has a lot of that history that dates from Jay McShann and Count Basie and Charlie Parker and all the people that came out of KC that are just so great. And there's just too numerous to mention. Pat Metheny, I used to play gigs and, Pat Metheny would show up and he'd sit in and we'd play. I remember playing a gig somewhere and Count Basie showed up, hanging out, I played with Ida, and many, many times when I was playing with Ida, Jay McShann would show up and sit with us and talk. And, it was just a great vibe, man. That whole scene there. It was small, but it was really cool, really good.
Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, and ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of who you are. Who do you think you are?
I'm a guy who loves to write music. I just love to write music, whether it's whether you can call it jazz music or not. The thing is all my music, every song, everything I write is meant to be improvised on. So I do write songs, but I consider myself a real songwriter. I like to write songs that are I'm hoping someday somebody else would like to play. I love to write these songs, figure out how to perform them, and then go out and get a gig and get that happening. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. It's kind of a simple concept, but that's it.
Beautiful, man. Steve, thank you, sir. I really appreciate it, and I do look forward to hopefully maybe you coming to KC and catching the show, man.
Okay, thanks, man. Talk to you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Chicago, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Steve for his time, music, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.